hit a couple buttons and okay, I've got your slide presentation up. If you want to attach and share your screen, I think I got you to co-host. Or you want me to share for you?
I can share. I mean, sure. Just want to text edits.
So welcome everybody. Chris Workman, City Manager. We'll do quick introductions from everybody that's in the room, and then we'll kind of go through the presentation. This is our Philomath Climate Friendly Area Engagement meeting, mostly just trying to get information out from what's been done from the last meeting till now with the survey and everything else, and won't steal the thunder of the presentation, so I'll just kind of stop there. Justin, you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, Justin Peterson with Oregon Cascades West Council of Governments, and we're helping Philomath with this project.
Hi everyone, Nick Meltzer, also with the Cascades West Council of Governments, and I've been supporting Justin on this effort.
Councilor Lehman, you want to introduce yourself?
Matt Lehman, Philomath City Council, just attending.
Great. Thank you. Take it away, gentlemen.
Perfect. So thank you everyone for being here. I did want to note too that we have 3J online as well, if anyone else does pop in online to help answer any questions. But this is the third public meeting for the climate friendly areas in Philomath. We had the first meeting, which was with our partner cities in Albany and Corvallis, as well as an introduction meeting. And then we had the second meeting in March in Philomath to dive into some more details related to Philomath and the project. So now this third meeting, we're going to kind of do a quick overview and then go into some of the anti-displacement work. So the first part we'll try and go through in pretty quickly, since some of it will be repeating public meeting number 2, and then we'll move into the anti-displacement analysis work. So this meeting will have a quick presentation and then some opportunity to provide comments once we're finished. So just for some context again, this slide is the same as from public meeting number 2, but this work came out of an executive order from the governor, and then the DLCD worked with the Land Conservation and Development Commission to do some rulemaking, and that rulemaking, as part of that, the climate friendly areas applies to Philomath, since Philomath falls between that 5,000 and 10,000 population and is in the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization area. And so just quick project roles. We have the cities just to provide that local knowledge, and then the city will be responsible for the final planning analysis for the anti-displacement work, and helping kind of with the public notices. 3J has been doing a lot of public outreach work in the communities. And then for COG, we've been working on the maps and the technical work and helping with the presentations. And then DLCD, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, has done the technical kind of support for any questions. So real quickly, just again, what is a climate friendly area? So really just think about your traditional downtown urban center areas or nodes, neighborhood centers, transit centers that have high quality bike ped transportation or plan to be served by as well. And then there's expected to be a mix of developments, so like traditional downtowns, retail, mixed with residential as well. And then the rules kind of have specific land use requirements. So some of the requirements here, just the goal is to avoid natural hazard areas. And then in the case of Philomath, all the proposed areas are within the UGB, but they would have to be within city limits, excuse me. And then kind of the minimum width of 750 feet. And there was kind of an update since the last meeting on the 750 feet standard. So instead of width, it was actually interpreted to be more of a diameter, so fitting a circle within the climate friendly area. And then these for along with, there has to be one area that's 25 acres in size. It could go slightly above that, but it needs to be at least 25 acres and then meet that 750-foot diameter. So those are kind of the dimensional key standards. And for residential development, it has to meet a 15 unit per net acre, and then the allowed building height of 50 feet. That doesn't necessarily mean every building within the climate friendly area will be 50 feet, but that's what the would have to be allowed by the code. Just real quickly, I'm not going to go into each of these in detail, but there's just some different kind of standards in terms of allowed uses within climate friendly areas, so multifamily, attached single family, office, childcare, schools, and then commercial as well. And then streetscape standards, so making sure the sidewalk areas have that landscaping to make them walkable areas. Max block length standards, and then not including a max residential building density limitation in the code. And then I kind of already mentioned the 15 units an acre or the mixed use buildings at a 2.0 floor area ratio standard. So I wanted to kind of revert back just so that everyone kind of could see at the March meeting, the maps that were presented as candidates. These are different from what we're going to show, but this is just to kind of show where we started and kind of where we're headed with the areas. So as you could kind of see on the last slide, some of those areas, they would not have met the 750-foot width standard as it's interpreted now, since they're kind of longer, skinnier areas. So some of the adaptations that were made were to kind of keeping within the same area, but focusing, making sure it's that 750-foot width could fit in there. So this is site A, and it has the C1, that downtown commercial, C2, office residential, and light industrial. And then kind of another change compared to the last meeting is we don't go as far north and east with the office residential area. I might go into this in another slide as well, but there were some possible displacement concerns in those residential neighborhoods. So this site is about 29 acres, so it's above that 25 acre minimum. And then compared to site B, kind of the main difference is it actually goes to the south to the residential area, the R2 zone, instead of going to the west. This one, I believe and the last one went all the way over to 10th Street, and I think this one ends at 12th Street. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris.
No, that's right.
And then so kind of site B goes to the south side of Applegate, and then it's also above that 25 acre minimum. So just a quick, at the time when we put the slides together, we had 10 responses on the survey, and then we have presented both candidate area A and B as just shown. And so they do overlap some, the areas, but for candidate A, there was some comments around being, in both I think are close to the library, but proximity to the library, redevelopment opportunities, and then some concerns over the heavy traffic through the area. And I think that could apply to both site A and B. And then site B, because it went south of Applegate, there were some concerns about the existing development on the south side, and then some concerns over flooding were mentioned in the comments. And then there were some comments for other areas to consider in terms of a question. So one thing was area north of Highway 20, and then focusing on vacant areas. At public meeting number 2, there was mention of an area east of and north of business or Highway 20, and I'm forgetting the 2 cross streets, but that area was not put in the survey because it was more envisioned by Planning Commission as more of like a larger box store, grocery store type development.
It'd be north of Highway 20, west of like 26th, east of 20th, that area.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Chris. And then for the expected code amendments, here we're not going to go into a ton of detail, but there'll be a climate friendly area study report that will be provided to the city by COG staff. Our deadline for that was the end of June, so we'll be providing that to the city. But it has it evaluates the existing, it focuses on the C1 downtown standards, and then possibly kind of there's two options for the city as part of phase 2, which will be in 2024 to move forward with the zoning code updates. And that would be adopting either an overlay or amending the C1 and possibly rezoning some adjacent areas so it's also C1. So there's some options. The overlay may be an easier option. But there's kind of one of the examples would be the height standard of 50 feet, so updating that to 50 feet. And I do believe there were some concerns from the fire department, so even if the height is allowed at 50 feet, those concerns for any development would have to meet the fire department's standards.
Okay. So as part of the rules, DLCD requires cities to do an anti-displacement analysis. So as we establish these new areas for housing, they wanted to be sure that we were considering any potential negative effects to displacing existing residents. So DLCD hired Portland State University to develop a detailed methodology and guide for analysis. That's available online for anyone who'd like to explore it in more detail. The data inputs that they used included vulnerable populations, housing markets, and neighborhood change. And something to keep in mind for this particular analysis is that it actually looks at changes over time and assigns census tracts, which are roughly larger than the neighborhood, a typology. And then based on that typology, they recommend specific anti-displacement strategies. This is a table of their categories, and you can see that I'll show you a map in a minute that Philomath areas are mostly unassigned, and what that means is that any of the displacement, anti-displacement strategies could be applied. So the categories here are on the left again, and there's a map of Philomath, and you can see that none of the areas, climate-friendly areas, nor really any of the city are covered in any of the typologies. And so as we went through our analysis, we kind of thought that, this didn't really provide a lot of detail or potential use to the city, so we wanted to explore potentially other options to provide more information or more tools to the city for analysis.
I just included this for reference.
Yeah, and so just for reference, you can see not even the entirety of Corvallis is covered, so just a few neighborhoods in Corvallis are covered.
So does that mean just those neighborhoods are they worried about displacement, or you have to be sensitive to displacement, and in other areas you don't?
Yeah, there's certain, so in each of those strategies, so say the affordable and vulnerable strategy, there's certain, the PSU analysis, it's kind of like a large table, and it identifies certain strategies for if the neighborhood was identified as affordable and vulnerable. These strategies, it'll say don't use these, or use caution when using this strategy, or this strategy is good to move forward. Whereas, yeah, the unassigned, it's kind of, you can move forward with any strategy.
Gotcha.
I think there were data limitations. They were doing this for the whole state, and they were using census tracts, which have more limited data. And so that's where we kind of looked and we said, oh, well, our small urban area, we've done block group kind of level analysis before, so let's explore doing that for kind of what we call a vulnerability index. And also with the MPO in the area, we've also done similar work, and so we kind of combined forces and developed a vulnerability index for the Corvallis area MPO, which covers Philomath, Corvallis, Adair Village, and portions of Benton County. Keep in mind, we didn't look at change over time, and so the PSU analysis is more robust in that regard. It looks at housing costs and neighborhood change over time. Ours is really just capturing a point in time, but it looks at where vulnerable populations live across the city compared to other portions of the city. Because we had kind of access to more detailed data, we're able to do a block group analysis, so that's kind of roughly smaller than a neighborhood. So we're able to kind of cover the entire city of Philomath. So again, we looked at distribution of vulnerable populations, including low income, non-white, and seniors above 65. We looked at people with one or more disabilities, people with limited English proficiency, households with children. And we also looked at people 25 and older who do not have a high school diploma, and renter households. And we collectively decided that we think these are vulnerable populations that could be more vulnerable to displacement. And then what we did is say where are higher proportions of these communities concentrated across the city. And what you come out with is a map that looks like this. And so again, this compares, neighborhood to neighborhood or block group to block group, and identifies areas where there's a higher concentration of those vulnerable communities. And so we just provide this as another tool to the city. And so if we zoom in, we can see in Philomath that the kind of southeastern portion of the city is low. The northern part is average, and then kind of right in the center is high. And that's, I think, does that overlap with potentially overlaps with one or both of the climate friendly areas. So again, we just looked at the vulnerable populations, and then we kind of refer folks back to the PSU guide to review the anti-displacement strategies. And so there's a list of those here, just some examples. Produce enough housing for residents at all income levels, including long-term and permanent affordable housing. Preserve, think about ways to preserve existing affordable housing. Plan ahead, identifying neighborhoods where action may be needed to preserve housing opportunities for low and moderate incomes. Protect current residents from displacement where neighborhoods are changing rapidly, or provide sufficient and affordable commercial space to support new small and locally owned businesses. And these are kind of the broad categories, and then the guide has much more detail on each of these. I think I'll hand it back to Justin.
Yeah, and these were some of the anti-displacement strategies that were in the housing chapter of Philomath's comprehensive plan. So in policy 5.2 kind of stated, evaluate the use of tools such as urban renewal, construction excise tax, SDC waivers, tax abatements, or transient lodging taxes or bonds as well. So we just pulled this from the Philomath comprehensive plan, and then on the next slide, we compared that to the neighborhood typology. So this is kind of where we provided a little bit of detail, but for urban renewal, for affordable and vulnerable, this is one of the strategies where if the neighborhood in Philomath was identified as affordable and vulnerable, that's an area where you use caution with urban renewal as a strategy. And then early gentrification and active gentrification, again, doesn't apply to Philomath, but that's where you would stop and plan. So kind of with all of these strategies could be used as planning anti-displacement strategies in Philomath, since those areas were unassigned. And then kind of for the equity impact on the last column, it's direct or indirect. So in this case, all of the strategies, according to that PSU table, were identified as direct strategies or impacts. This is just a summary of kind of some of the engagement that's been done. So 3J, who's online, has done a lot of this work, and then we've had kind of the 3 public meetings. So they've been engaging, it kind of includes not just Philomath, but also Corvallis and Albany in their work, but they've done a lot of community presentations around climate-friendly areas. So this is just a list of all of that work. So they've done, in January and March, 7 stakeholder interviews. And then we've had that online questionnaire as well for the proposed CFAs, which I think is still active, I want to say.
I think through tonight.
Okay, perfect. And just other community presentations that were presented. And then this is just reference for timeline. So we're on that third round. It still says April and May because that was our target, but we ended up pushing to the end of May or June for all of our cities meetings, just because of timing. And we'll provide that draft CFA study tomorrow. And then for the next 6 months, the city can kind of refine those areas before submitting the study to the state. So there's kind of a 6-month period where there could be some more anti-displacement planning strategy work or refining some of the boundaries if needed. And then in 2024, that's the adoption process. So the city will move through actually adopting an overlay district for whatever that final climate-friendly area boundary is decided on. And I guess, just to mention before we end, there's the 2 candidate climate-friendly areas, but those don't necessarily have to be it's not one or the other. There could be tweaks to either candidate area to create like a hybrid boundary or going a different direction with the boundary as well. So they're not meant to be the final pick site A or site B.
Yeah, and I'll just add, as we're looking at the anti-displacement policies with the Planning Commission, that may determine kind of what that final boundary looks like as well. There's a lot to talk through with them. So the city's next steps, as was shown, we'll look at that draft report. That's going to go to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission is going to take point on reading through that and having those discussions on boundaries and make a final recommendation to the City Council by the time we get to that 2024 deadline. So we've got some time to do some more public outreach from the city side before we define those lines. I will just add the Planning Commission last month, we're still in July, earlier this month in June, the Planning Commission met and talked about a whole array of code updates within the commercial development areas. And so we're looking at the C1 zone, the downtown commercial, a C2, more general commercial, and a new C3, more of a regional commercial zoning. They're looking at all the different provisions that go in there, and planning staff and myself as a city manager, we've been able to incorporate a lot of these standards into the development code already. But we do recognize we'll probably still need to have some type of overlay district that will be applicable regardless of whether it's C1 or C2 or C3, regardless of where it'll be. So some of this work has already started and been happening kind of in parallel as the study's been getting drafted and being prepared, and those will all mesh together at the Planning Commission, and we'll look to get a final recommendation out to the City Council by next year. Any questions from the audience?
None that aren't laced with sarcasm.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Nick and Justin, for coming and presenting. Thanks, everybody who will be watching this online later. Thank you to who's on here, Natalie and whoever else from 3J Consulting that's there. Any final comments, Justin or Nick? All right. Thanks again, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of the evening. And any questions on climate-friendly areas, feel free to contact the city manager's office. website, or hit me directly on my email, chris.workman@philomatheoregon.gov. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.